Hi. Hi, I'm Sareh Heidari. Nice to see you all. I work at BBC News as a web developer in London. It's my first time in Singapore, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me. On the screen is a photo of me exploring the day before this conference in Singapore. And my fun fact is that I absolutely love the weather here. Everyone here seems to think I'm weird for that, but it's awesome. Even the rain, I love that you have warm rain here. I don't understand it, but it's awesome. Yes. So in London, I work on the BBC News web pages. So they are for curated content to help people discover content. So what that means in practice is that I work on pages like this. So this is the screenshot from today of the BBC News website, so on the front page. In addition to these, we do like all sorts of other kind of creations and things of like collections of articles and content like that. So that's about me. What are we going to talk about today? So the talk is called Accessibility in You. First, I will talk about myself, because that's kind of fun. I will talk about a little bit about a few little stories about how I got interested in accessibility. Then I'll talk about what I do at BBC News and a couple of examples of the work that we do there. And most importantly, I think, is getting you all started. So if you haven't started at all, well, what was great about this conference is that earlier on the first day, we had awesome talks showing you screen readers and things like that. So you probably all have a bit of familiarity with it. So hopefully I'll go into other aspects of accessibility and how you can get started if you haven't already. So, oops. So let's get started. So let me go back a few years. Before I ever became a web developer or had anything really to do with tech as a job, I was at university in London. I didn't really think about accessibility at all, to be honest. Like, I'm able-bodied, don't have a disability, and my only current understanding was physical accessibility like this. So this is a photo of the entrance to one of the university buildings. On the front side of the photo, you've got some steps, and on the other side, you've got a ramp to enter the building. I was like, okay, cool. They thought about things so people with wheelchairs can get in the building. Great. Right, so that's all good, right? Whilst I was studying there, a friend of mine had a chronic illness, then needed to be able to use a wheelchair. And so they had got to use were able to get a powered wheelchair, electric wheelchairs, to be able to navigate around, which is cool. They were able to do that. And some of the lecture theatres that they were in and buildings they were in were able to have the ramps, and they were able to enter. The first month after that, I think, they were going to go to the Students' Union. And this is where, if you don't know what Students' Unions are like, I mean, they also have like coffee shops and things, but they also have like the offices of like the welfare officers for students and people who can give advice to students that need help. So like, you need access to them. And the building had a lift, so this is the lift, which is awesome, but it is, probably you can't see from the photo, maybe you can, it's really narrow. You can probably walk in there, but the wheelchair can't enter. They couldn't enter, so it's like someone's thought about one aspect, but not really thought about how they've gone to the expense of building this whole lift and like reorganizing the whole building to make it work with a lift, but not really thought about like, wider doors and things like that. So it's not quite as useful. And in addition to that, so that's one building, there were lectures that were up on like the top floor on like rickety staircases that had to be like rearranged and things because they hadn't considered that one of the students might need special access to this. And this was, I thought, was pretty frustrating. My friend was pretty frustrated with it as well. The fact that they had to go to each individual lecturer to ask them to change everything, to rearrange between the rooms and all of that. And this is like like seeing them do that just made me realize just how many barriers there are, even from an institution that professes to be open and accessible, and in terms of wanting to have such a range of a wide variety of students and talks about the diversity of its student body. So that was like my first like major kind of thinking like, things need to be improved in the world. Things like even places, people that care about or say that they care about accessibility really need to do a lot better. Now I'm going to talk about something that might seem completely unrelated. Family tech support. So hands up if you have ever had to be have the tech support for any family member. Come on. Come on, there's more of you than that. Yes, yes, okay, pretty much everyone here. Yes, me too. I constantly, whenever I call family members, they're like, by the way, how do I update this thing? Yeah, yes, so this is a photo of Karaj, a city close to Tehran. It's the capital of Iran, where my family's from. And yes, we've got mountains with snow too. It's not just deserts. And so I visit my grandparents and extended family there every year or so. And when I do that, usually I get asked like, can you fix something? Which is cool. So first thing, so about a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, my granddad was like, right, I've heard like everyone has email. I want an email account. I want to be able to email you. I was like, that's cool. Yay, awesome. I will set you up with a Gmail account, because I have Gmail and pretty much everyone has Gmail, why not? And we did. And then I used Gmail like every day. Up until that moment, I didn't realize there was anything wrong with it at all, because I was using it. It like allowed me to have everything that I want, like so many emails, so many attachments, all of the things that I needed were there. Except when I had to explain how to do things to my granddad. And I realized just how many steps there are. So if you haven't used Gmail, this is a screenshot of like the web interface on desktop. There is a bright red compose button near the top. I didn't realize like the fact that it says compose. I hadn't noticed that the fact that it says compose and not like new message. So compose, when you put that in Google Translate, it comes up like composing music. And so it doesn't translate very well. So it's like, why don't call it new message? It's kind of like, and it's just like the little things, the language that people use in their user interface. It's like things that I hadn't really paid attention to before. I learned what it did and just ignored what it said. And I like had to explain what composition means in this context, which was really bizarre. But yeah, okay, so that's fine. That's what that means, that's what the button is. Yeah, so that's it, selected. And then I was like, well, okay, well, and then my granddad was like, okay, cool, so now how do I email a specific person? How do I email you? How do I email like my aunt and my aunts and things? And I was like, cool, I'll save all of everyone's like email addresses in the contact list. And he was like, super, that's great. And he's like, asked me, how do I find them? I was like, well, sure, you just go on this and then you click that. And it's like, but why do I click the thing that says Gmail? And then behind it, there's a thing that says contacts. And then behind that, I click a form, and then I fill out a form, and then it auto-completes. Like, why are there 5 steps? I was like, I don't know. Like, I just got used to it, because like that's how I just did things. I just do that, and it auto-completes, and it just like, for me, it just says. But when I had to explain it all into like multiple steps, like, that's a lot of steps for something that basically every person does regularly with email, right? You send emails to people in your contacts. Yeah, and so, and my granddad is like, clever, he does like lots of contract-related stuff, and he's fine with like things with lots of steps. But sometimes if he doesn't do things like regularly, like, he doesn't need to check his email like 5 times a day, to be honest. So if he doesn't do them regularly, then he forgets what the million steps are to do the thing. And so what I ended up doing, is writing it out. So I had to write it out like in Farsi, so that's the language I wrote, including tiny little, really badly drawn like icons of like what the buttons do and like what order to do the thing in and things. And I realized that really like, okay, this is a user interface with like, okay, built that had been built, and people built it for their own use cases and not really realized all the different steps there. And it really made me think, and maybe not necessarily at that moment, but just like thinking afterwards a lot about what interface accessibility means. So it's not like my granddad couldn't use the Gmail web interface. He could. It's not like he was prevented from using it. Didn't necessarily. I mean, he has bad eyesight, so he had to wear his glasses. But it's not like he couldn't access the website, the service. He could. It was just that by setting up the interface like that, it just made it a chore. It made it so difficult. It made it a pain and an annoyance to have to go through that. And so that made me think about how accessibility can be more than just giving people with disabilities access to a service. It can be ease of use as well. It can be making people's lives just like more enjoyable, like making their use of tech an enjoyable experience and not just like a painful list of things to memorize to have to go through. So yeah, so that was like another little aspect of things that I went through. And let's fast forward a bit to my first web development role. By this point, I'd done a coding bootcamp because I knew I really wanted to do web development, but didn't really have the specific skill set to get a job. So I did one of those for 3 months, in one of those intensive ones. And I realized that, yeah, I would like to work at a place that cares about best practices, so I could learn best practices for things, and cares about accessibility and things like that. And I was really, really lucky to find out that BBC News were hiring. And if you are not aware, BBC News is part of like the BBC, and BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, is partly funded by the UK taxpayers via like the TV license. And so it has a public service remit. So it has like a legal obligation to educate and inform and also be accessible to as much of the population UK as possible, which is pretty cool. And so that's why I kind of like was really excited to be able to work there. And I remember raising it in the interview, and they liked to mention it, and they also really liked the fact that I cared about accessibility as well, and I thought that was pretty good indicator of things. Okay, so that was that. So now I'm going to go on to a bit more about how we look at things when we talk about accessibility at BBC and BBC News in particular, which is where I work. So let's look at a high level of what types of disabilities we think about. Most people might be more aware of vision impairment, so blindness or partially sighted people who can't view the screen very well or at all. So use screen readers and other assistive technologies. Also, you have people who are hard of hearing, so might not be able to listen to the audio and videos, and so would require, for example, captions on video content and transcripts of audio content, and things like that. People with cognitive disabilities, so this includes people with dyslexia or who have or autism. Sorry. And then also people with motor skills impairments. And so what I liked is hearing the whole range of understanding the, well, obviously this isn't like an exhaustive list, but different groups of people with various disabilities, and understanding their different needs was something that we learned initially. So now I'm going to talk about how that actually, okay, so that's like maybe some of the audience, but I'm going to talk about an actual case study of something that is currently being worked on at the BBC. So BBC Wreath is a new font family, recently built by the design teams at the BBC. So here on the screen is an example of the Sareh fonts. And what I liked was reading about the aims. So, okay, so the aims are distinctiveness. So basically what they wanted to do, the design teams wanted to make pages look distinctively BBC. So you look at them and you read the content and it's like, it feels like different to other sites. Okay, that's very designy. It doesn't really make sense to me, but okay. That's something that kind of goes over my head, but okay, I can understand the fact that exists. There's also a money-saving argument because Helvetica costs a lot to license, to pay for the license. So they're like, you know, if we do something in-house, then we own the license for it, so we don't need to like pay tons of money for it. But one of the three cool aims, which I quite liked, was that it was legibility. So to ensure that this font family is more legible than the existing ones that we use. Okay. So to make sure that happened, once they had like an iteration of the font that they quite liked, the user research team liked, they actually, what's the design team like? They conducted user research. So 36 participants. Yeah, 18 of them with cognitive disabilities, including dyslexia, autism, and ADHD. To look at, to do in-lab viewing of websites with the previous font, so the Helvetica one and the new one, BBC Wreath, and to give feedback on what the differences were and whether they thought it was more legible or less legible, or all of that. And this is one particular participant's response. So Wreath, the new font, is clearer to read, more spacing so the words don't blur. It takes me less time to work out whether it's a P or a Q. I look for tails on the P's and Q's, that is, to see which way around it is. So the previous fonts made it more difficult, and BBC Wreath made it much, much more easy. So what does this mean is that, yes, so even the design teams are thinking about how to make this more legible, and how to consider people with a range of needs. What's even better about this is that if it is more legible to people with dyslexia, say, it becomes more legible for pretty much everyone else as well, which is pretty cool. So that's one, so BBC Wreath, the new font, that's one aspect. Another thing is that one thing that I found out pretty much immediately when I joined was that we have accessibility champions, which sound pretty like awesome, right? Who doesn't want to be a champion? Yeah. Basically, anybody can be a champion at the start. You don't need any like accessibility expertise to start off with. You don't need that at all. Just need the willingness to learn, which is cool. Started off a few years ago, and now there are over like 150 developers, designers, and testers across 26 teams across the BBC. So that's in sport and music and news and iPlayer and all sorts of different products that, and also internal products that facing other developers and other journalists and things as well. And so that's a lot of people, and what as a part of that is that you get, we've got like a Slack team, so there's a supportive online community to, so if you have any questions, you're like, I don't know what to do here, you can just ask somebody there, and there is that support, which is pretty cool. One thing that I loved about it is that initially, first thing, pretty much on my first month, I was like, I want to be one of these, because I want to learn more about accessibility. I want to be an accessibility champion. And then the first thing is what's called Task Zero, which is quite cool because it's like a zero. It feels like there's a low barrier to entry, right? It's not even task one. It's like zero. So it's almost like you have zero knowledge. It's fine. So I wanted to share this because I think it's a great way, if you haven't really done much like accessibility testing before, how you can get started. So you can choose a key feature from your product. So it might be the whole page, it might be a specific new feature. And you pick 5 standards from the guidelines. Right, so I'll talk about the guidelines in a bit. This is, like, for example, the news front page. This is a slice from it, so it has a local news section which people can type in their local area and they search there and they get like content that's local to them. While the accessibility guidelines, BBC has these mobile accessibility guidelines. They take like the actual like standard body stuff and make it like more understandable. So it's not in standard written speak. It's written in like understandable language. And so there are sections that are on web accessibility and also iOS and Android. So you've got that. So regardless of what kind of mobile device project you're working on. And like at the bottom, which is pretty cool, you might not be able to see it because it's kind of small. There are examples of how you test. So like procedures like activate the screen reader and fill out the form, and you check that when you have, so this is the focus, the focus guideline. Check that the focus doesn't move on to different things, that it actually stays stable. So it only moves when you actually tab or you press enter and things like that. So it has actual like clear step-by-step guidelines that you can take. So that was task 0. And after task 0, what we did is that we wrote down notes. So I wrote down notes of what happened. Like, did I find anything? Were there any bugs? Did it work as expected? Did it do something that I didn't know whether it was right or wrong? But like, I don't know, it did a thing. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And then I was able to talk with the head of the team, the head of the Accessibility Champions team, right? And they were able to give me advice. But what about you? What if you don't have like a whole team of like 150 people, which is quite a lot to get advice from? There are other people you can ask. There's the Web Alley, so A11Y Slack channel, which is like over 2,000 people from around the world, like including like experts that write like standards and things, and also like complete beginners. There's Twitter, there's hashtags, A11Y hashtags, and as you've heard, like yesterday and the day before, disabilities who are based in Singapore. And if any of you are based here or in around surrounding like Southeast Asia, you should definitely drop them a message because they would like to get in touch and do to help you out with auditing your pages. They're awesome people. Okay. So you've done a task 0. You've kind of found maybe a bug, maybe not bug, all of that. Well, what do you do to like a full review of things? How do you manage that? Well, we've got a GitHub repo with all of the steps that we take for news. So that includes things like information for developers, for designers, for if you've got a business analyst in your team, for them. If you've got a product owner, what they need to be thinking of right at the beginning of a project when they're talking to stakeholders and information gathering and things like that. So it's like super detailed, but it's also got sections for you. So like for developers, it's got information of like before development starts, what should you do? Like talk to designers about things before things have been set in stone, things like that. And then it's got things throughout development, what should you do? So there are all sorts of different levels of things. So first, on the first day, it talked about linting. So like ESLint. There is, if you use, and then just now we're talking about like other frameworks. So we use React on the server side. And so we use like JSX, ESLint, like accessibility lint tools. So basically what that does is that if you forget to put an alt text attribute to explain what an image is, it like warns you when you're writing and things. So you find out about errors just as you're writing. So just like you would find out about a missed closing bracket as you're typing and you need to fix it. It tells you like right up front, so it doesn't become like, it doesn't build up to have like a million errors. You just fix it as you go along, which is pretty cool. There are lots of browser dev tools. There's like, if you open up Chrome, you've got an accessibility tab. And you can do an accessibility audit that gives you like a score of 100 to just give you like that gives you hints in terms of what you should be looking at first. there are online pages of tools. So you can basically put the URL, if it's already live, if your product is already live, you can put a URL into there and it can give you a review there. There's manual testing with devices. So I'm pretty sure if you're all web developers, you've got a mobile phone or a laptop or a device there, open it up there and you can use pretty much all iOS and Android and Macs and everything. They have inbuilt screen readers you can test out there. And if you're not sure about how to do that, on this URL, there are like instructions about how to step through that and get started. Okay, so that's kind of what you do when you're like, if you're kind of by yourself, you're not really sure, like, and you want to get started and things like this. But what do you do if you're in a larger team? So this is a few techniques. Yes, so this is kind of like when you've convinced your manager this is a good thing. But you can do this on the sly, which is always good. But like, okay. So accessibility swarms. It's not as terrifying as it sounds. It's really quite fun. It's basically, so this is a photo of like a few of us, the developers in our team, sitting in a booth with all the devices out on the table. So like our laptops, accessibility laptops, phones, the developer who's taking the selfie was using Drag and Dictate, so a software that you can talk at it and it navigates you through the page, so you don't need to like use the keyboard or a mouse at all. You could just talk and browse the web, which is pretty cool. Yes, so you can do that. And the reason why this is really fun, it really changed the way like we looked at accessibility reviewing our products, is that it became a fun activity. It didn't become like a chore that you just like had to like tick off before you could merge your code. It became like you like look forward to like the two hours in the afternoon that you had booked in your calendar, because like you get to like try out a thing and you get to laugh and you get to like make fun of somebody like using trying to teach the dictation software and it can understand its accent and it's really great. Yeah, but it's cool because it's like it's a lot of fun and it can make something that I think a lot of people think that's quite tedious into a really enjoyable activity, and it's work, so it counts. These are devices that we have. If you've got budget, then you can probably get a whole lot of other devices like this. If you don't, just using what you have is fine. We have a device matrix that we use, so we actually look at what devices are most commonly used in the UK, what assistive tech is most commonly used in the UK, because that's like our main audience there, and prioritize them. So we've got like a priority 1 level and a priority 2 level and things like that. So you can go into a lot more detail rather than if you've got that, the stats for there. And then if you've got a little bit more budget, you can do user research. So this photo is of a user research laboratory. So in London, it's got a one-way mirror, which is the coolest thing. It's like, so we're sitting on one side of the one-way mirror, and the participants of the user research are sitting on the other with somebody like asking them questions and things. Well, not asking them questions, more like guiding them and telling them what to use there. And the great thing is that as a result of that, we get really positive feedback from everybody. So like Nora, senior designer, says that she now understands the pain that assistive tech, users of assistive tech can go to access content. So, so that's great, because the thing is that we want to like, not only is the user research good for us to find out what bugs we have in our software, but it's also really, really great so that we can get more people within our organization to really understand why it's an issue and like get on board and be active advocates for caring about accessibility too. So that's Nora Tagako as a developer who found it really eye-opening experience and viewing the user research and wanted to apply it to everyday practice. And finally, Alison was the assistant editor, so on the stakeholder side of things. So we invited people from both who are on the stakeholders as well as like in the product team. And she felt it was really interesting to see what particular problems they faced. And this is like invaluable because then next time when we're talking about why something, we had to like redo a feature and things because of accessibility, they understand why. And they like acknowledge the fact that that is like that is a totally valid reason why, like, you know, the feature is delayed to we delay launching and things. And this is like amazing to get everybody on all sides of the organization involved and understanding and positive about accessibility. Yeah, like over half of us, like this is the first time they're using tech, and pretty much everyone said that their level of awareness had like improved drastically. So that was a bit of a whirlwind tour, talking about, yeah, why I think accessibility is important, what we're kind of doing at BBC, and just brief overviews about what you can do to get started. Feel free, I'll share the links later, and feel free to ask me questions. Thank you very much. And yes, thank you very much, guys.